So, hello everyone. I am Paula and I am also from California, LA. And so I will be presenting on the applications and methodologies of human-assisted evolution in sustaining coral reefs. And this is more of a presentation focusing on the environmental science of around our globe and the current environmental issues as well. Whoops, there we go. So to begin with, coral reefs are one of the vulnerable marine ecosystems that are very important for the overall health of the ocean. And by the name, y'all probably know that the main components of coral reefs are corals. Corals, which are colonial invertebrate of the cnidarian family. Yes, corals are animals, they are life. And coral reefs are also very directly important for human populations as well. So coral reefs hold large biodiversity that supports an overall estimate of 25% of all known marine species. So they play a very important role in sustaining the ocean health, which also directly affects humans who live by the coast because reefs also play a role of protecting shorelines from storm and erosion. And they are also important source of food and commerce. So a lot of people depend on them. And now we have established the importance of corals. Currently, the most threatening event that are harming them is bleaching. So coral bleaching is where the coral loses many of its important symbionts that are crucial for its health. So corals have a very important symbiotic relationship with microorganisms that live within the coral polyps, where the microorganism act as the main energy source as well as provide pigmentation for the coral. And so this is also why when symbionts are no longer present, when the coral loses its color, so they just remain white. So this is where the name coral bleaching comes from. And so when corals are bleached, they will experience starvation because they lost their main energy food source, which are the symbionts. So the point I want to make here is that bleached corals are not dead corals, but they are in danger because they are currently starving. So if bleaching is present for a prolonged period, then it may have lethal results. And bleaching can be caused by many different factors, which one of the most prevalent one is rising temperature. I'm sure most of you are all aware with all the current climate change going on. And however, there is an individual variation in how individual corals respond to the heat stress, where individuals may react differently to the same level of heat stress. And so take, for example, this graph. So each red point here is a single coral specimen of a coral species known as called Pacillopora acuta. This experiment, which this graph is taken from, monitors the stress response when all these coral specimens are exposed to heat stress. And the y-x-axis is the duration where this experiment was on for a period of 16 weeks. And the y-axis is the bleaching score, which is a measure of the intensity of bleaching, and the lower the bleaching score is, the more bleached the coral is. So the important point here is the coral that I have boxed here. So we can see that even though all of them come from the same population, they have a variance in how they respond to the same stress, where some corals are having a very strong response with a bleaching score over -100, while some others are able to maintain in the upper ends of the population, which specifically the corals are boxed here. And so the reason for this is because every coral have different physiology and genetics. So this establishes the importance of genetic diversity, and which ensures the overall resilience of the population, as well as determining the evolvability of a species, which are very important. So let's take this hypothetical example that explains how natural evolution occurs. Take, for example, there are only 100 corals in this population. And so then there was a really, really hot summer and a heat wave hit. And so some corals were not able to withstand, therefore died. So only 40 corals survived. And so what this means is that this remaining 40 corals, the reason that they were able to survive is because they are the ones that have an overall more resilience towards heat in this population due to their unique genetic composition. So in the end, it will be all up to the 40 corals here to to be performing breeding, where their offsprings will likely inherit this temperature tolerance. And so in conclusion, because the offsprings are all from the original 40 corals, so as a result, this whole population overall now have a very improved heat tolerance. And so this is how natural evolution occurs. Yippee. And so, however, a reminder that bleaching is mostly induced by temperature. And looking at this graph from NASA, where it indicates the ocean temperature change, and so we can see that a very, very positive trend where the ocean is getting hotter. So this graph shows that as temperature increases, bleaching will also increase in frequency and intensity. And furthermore, just very, very recently, in April 15th of this year, which is just literally just like a few months ago, NOAA confirms that we are currently experiencing the fourth global scale bleaching event. And the significance of this is that this is already the second global scale bleaching event that happened in the last 10 years. So we can see that bleaching is occurring more frequently. And so a valid question to ask is whether corals will be able to react in time. And the answer is probably not, because coral as a population are very vulnerable and they take a long time to get sexually mature to reproduce. Thus, evolution will not be happening very frequently. So, solution scientists pose is assisted evolution, excuse me, where it is a human intervention of the natural evolution process, where the goal is to accelerate evolution. And there are many ways researchers approach this method. For example, preconditioning, where they will pre-expose the corals to a mild stressor. So they will later, when they experience the real one, they will be much more tolerant because they've already experienced something like this. So it is not so much as a surprise, I would say. And the second method is, the second method is very direct, where it is directly modifying the genetics of various gene editing technologies. And I know Shruti and I already touched upon this, so I'm not going to talk about it more. I'm just going to make an emphasize that using genetic editing technologies and improving resilience towards corals have already demonstrated success. For example, in studies done by researchers from Johns Hopkins University. However, there are still clear limitations to knowing how complex genetics are. And the last method I will touch upon is selective breeding or artificial selection, where this is by selecting temperature-tolerant parent corals to enhance the chances of having resilient offsprings. And breeding will be happening continuously, and so it will improve the overall resilience of the whole population. However, though assisted evolution sounds like a pretty well-rounded method in my opinion, there are still considerations that are necessary to be made. And one is, so assisted evolution, it is an adaptation to improve the population or the individual. However, this improvement can happen either only within the individual itself, or it can be passed down to its offsprings. And the goal for assisted evolution has always been for the trait to be able to pass down. So if the researchers can only improve a single individual, it does not help much for the entire population. And so this is still an uncertainty that scientists cannot guarantee. So accurately calculating inheritance of the improved trait is still an area that would require more research. And furthermore, some other considerations that are necessary to avoid further harm in the natural habitat is, first of all, the ethical implications of it, because assisted evolution itself, overall, it is just artificially changing a natural genetic of a natural species, which controversies obviously rise. But in my opinion, all the issues that are harming the corals are not natural. A lot of them have a human factor that plays into it. So this is already an artificially exacerbated issue that nature cannot take on its own. So there will definitely require a human intervention. And the second consideration is conservation selection. So there are over, I'd say, 6,000 at least coral species, and we do not have the resources to save them all. So there has to be a consideration made of which ones are we going to protect and which ones we will leave out. So there will be some necessary assessment to be made by assessing the environmental value of each coral species. And the last consideration I have is about invasives. So assisted evolution is improving its trait of the species, and where after improving it, a concern I have is that this improved species might just be too strong to be released back into the wild because it might become an invasive. So therefore, it will require a lot of assessment prior and considerations to be made prior to returning the individual back into the wild to avoid further harm in the natural habitat. And these questions are all ones that will eventually come up as more research are done. So it will definitely require a lot more research and effort to be put in to ensure that our purpose of sustainability does not backfire and cause further harm. And so lastly, this is my last slide, we have to acknowledge that corals are vulnerable and they are unable to persist within the rapid change. So humans will need to take on the responsibility to sustain the coral populations, which this is for the corals, for the ocean, and also for the entire globe. And here are my works cited. And thank you so much for watching my presentation. And if you have any feedback or just want to have a discussion with me about marine biology, I am like a marine biology nerd. And please send me an email via Paula37369. And thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you, Paula, for sharing this. I had no idea, actually. You had said that bleached coral is not dead coral. And
Yes.
yeah, I think that's probably a common misconception. I'm
Mhm.
curious, is there a way to reverse bleaching or is it permanent?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. That was something I wanted to add on my slide, but did not have a chance because of time. So bleaching, coral bleaching, I would say it is. Before, it has been a natural thing because you know how just natural seasons come up and then it's just sometimes it's just a lot hot, sometimes and then the temperature cools down. So during this summer, some corals will just naturally get bleached. And then when the temperature goes down, it will just recover on its own. And so before coral bleaching was not an issue, but because of climate change and all those human activities, right now the bleaching period has been prolonged to where it is causing harm to the corals. So yes, so if that answers your question, coral bleaching is completely natural and it was not an issue before, but now because of humans, it is now.